the buyout north of $70 million, and Paul Finebaum, first reported by Texas Ags, by the way. But by and large, Paul, the Jimbo Fisher, not experiment, but the financial drain that has been Jimbo Fisher appears to be done at Texas A&M.
Yeah, and we don't know that much right now, but Matt, what we do know is that this is all going down. I mean, this apparently reached a head after last week's loss to Ole Miss, and there was a board meeting Thursday. It finally got on the agenda, and apparently the 77 million or whatever the specific number is pretty close to that. Somebody said, let's go ahead and do it. And as far as timing, we're taping this mid to late morning. Everybody knows what's going on, and players are already tweeting. I think they'll go through, you know how this works. They'll have meetings with the players. Right now it's expected to be officially announced sometime late this afternoon. It likely could happen earlier. None of that matters. What matters is that Jimbo Fisher is out. He has been on death's doorstep now for about a year and a half. And this was inevitable. And a lot of our friends in the media kept saying, well, it's too much money. The fact that Texas is knocking on the door of a playoff, none of that matters. It does matter. And I think this is the absolute right decision for the school. I know the national folks from academia will say, how can you spend $77 million? The largest buyout, I believe, was Gus Malzahn at $21 million.
Yep.
At least Gus Malzahn got to a national championship game. I mean, I'll give him, and ironically, lost to Jimbo Fisher. But this was not going to work. Jimbo Fisher did not have the magic that he used to have, and you have to start wondering. And as we put him to bed, was he really an outstanding coach, or did he live off of Jameis Winston for 2 years?
Yeah, so there's so many ways to unpack this, and we're going to do it here on this Sunday morning of just absolutely stunning news, candidly, because you're thinking if something like this is going to happen with a head coach, it typically comes after a really, really bad loss, not a 51-10 beat down of Mississippi State, which, by the way, I'd keep an eye on that job coming open.
Yeah, no, if they had announced the other guy was leaving,
yeah,
would not have been surprised.
Right. And so to the timing of this is odd. So I want to start here. And you are right. Jimbo Fisher, a really good coach, won a national championship at Florida State. And he was always the coveted one. He was always coveted at LSU because of his ties to LSU. He was always a guy that people just really wanted to dare themselves to see if they could get out of Florida State. Well, if they'd have done some background checks at Florida State, they would have seen that Jimbo Fisher was just unhappy there anyway. He won big there, but he thought Florida State was behind the times in facilities. He didn't like things that were going on locally. So he was a guy that may have played hard to get, but was waiting for the right opportunity. Texas A&M comes up with the right opportunity financially. They really believe that they had a guy that could take them to that next level, perhaps of what he did at Florida State. But the ACC is not the SEC. And there was always, this was always all over the place when he was at Texas A&M, but they always compared him per game with Kevin Sumlin. There was always that chart of through this many games with Kevin Sumlin. And when you get down to it, Paul, this was a $75 million disaster because he never did better than Kevin Sumlin. He was right there with Kevin Sumlin. And now $70+ million later, Texas A&M is no better than they were, 7 years ago when they hired Jimbo Fisher than they are as we sit here today on November 12th.
In fact, I think they're worse off because they really become a punchline to a lot of people. Now, the one thing Jimbo Fisher proved you can do at Texas A&M is recruit at an elite level.
Yeah,
he just could never make it happen, and it's just what's really going to be interesting. And just trying to, I've watched a lot of these as you have, Matt. What this tells me is the fact they're firing him now is they want at least a 2-week jump on the rest of the field. I believe he's the first coach that's been fired for on the field. I mean, we all know Mel Tucker got fired, and there may have been somebody else for.
Yeah, Northwestern came up with Patrick.
Yeah, but those were off the field.
Right.
what this means is they're already at it. I mean, in other words, they call Jimmy Sexton, who represents this Jimbo, and you want to be the first one out, and this there will be a domino effect, because 2 weeks from today it's not for most people, but for the Texas A&Ms of the world, that's the end of the regular season.
That's right.
The ADs want to move in there, and they want to coach by 2 weeks from tomorrow, so they can get. There's a very narrow window. It tells me they've got their eyes on somebody, because they've been looking around, and if they didn't think they could land a white whale, so to speak, I don't think they would have made this move.
You don't.
So I think that there's somebody. I mean, let's get right to it. Everybody wants to know who's next. The names that are, when you see names by media, and I know my media friends are going to be upset with me, but I'm going to tell the truth. When you see names being leaked, what does that mean? That means agents are leaking these names. These aren't university officials like, yeah, we're looking at these 6 guys. So
right.
What are the names? Lane Kiffin, where did that come from? Jimmy Sexton. Dan Lanning, where did that come from? I mean, we can go right. Mike Elko. I'm not sure. I know who Mike is represented by, but you probably do. Probably Sexton. It doesn't matter, but these are the names that are floating to the top.
Yeah, and I don't know how much validity. I mean, look, we may as well go there, since this is going to be the story now for the next 2 weeks. So you said a couple of things. We had to piece through this little by little. 2 weeks, you're right. Next week, there's Thanksgiving weekend, season ends, and there's championship week of the first weekend of December, which of course Texas A&M won't be involved. But let's go to a guy like Dan Lanning. He is likely going to be involved in championship weekend. And oh, by the way, likely going to be in the college football playoff, has a shot at the college football playoff. So that's a name that I know a lot of A&M fans will look at because of his tutelage under Kirby Smart and what Kirby's been able to do at Georgia. The timing of this is where college football is in trouble. And I've said that for the past couple of years, where you've got these coaches that are flirting with a bowl game or a college football playoff, and they get whisked away by their new AD at their new school. And then you basically did all of this work. You did all of this to get hired by your new school and not finish what you started at your other school. We saw it with Brian Kelly, Notre Dame to LSU. And that's essentially what got Marcus Freeman the job, is Brian Kelly left them before the season when Notre Dame stood a chance at the playoff. And now he's the new head coach at LSU. And so some of these names that are going to be out there, Lane Kiffin, he got beat last night handily by Georgia. He's going to be available because they're not going to be playing in an SEC championship game. The one that just doesn't add up timing-wise to me, Paul, is the Dan Lanning name. But I think Dan Lanning would probably be a home run by Texas A&M standards because of his age and his connection to the conference.
Yeah, and don't forget Dan was a graduate assistant under Nick Saban, and that's when he made the move over to Georgia with Kirby. So I think Lanning is the name that moves the needle. Lane, it feels like we're always talking about Lane. I mean, I think Lane would take it because Lane, after last night, realized he needs 5-star linemen. He may have the finesse, and he may have the QB and the wide receivers and the running back, and he knows how to dial up a game plan. But when you can rotate the kind of players that Kirby does, it's hard to compete with that. So I mean, this will be the wild talk, but I mean, I think there's another narrative. I mean, Elko's a name too, and I don't mean to be rambling here about but this is literally happening as we're speaking. Elko coached out there. He was the first name that people mentioned. You know Elko better than I do. To me, I just think that's a little bit I just don't see Elko going to A&M. He, as we talked about 2 weeks ago, he's a different kind of guy.
Yeah, and look, you have to look at it. Dan Mullen and I talk about this all the time. What kind of job is it? How can you win? Where are you going with this? And Texas A&M fans aren't going to want to hear this. But when you look at the SEC power structure, let's just look at the SEC West, just the West right now, because there's divisions are going away. So this is going to be a moot point. Hell with it. Let's move forward into the future. Mm-hmm. Let's look at the whole conference in totality. Georgia won in the SEC for jobs. Okay. Jobs in terms of power rankings, 1. Alabama 2, LSU 3. You would think at some point Tennessee in there at 4, Florida in there at 5. I would put Texas. Well, you know what? New SEC.
Yeah. I was about to say, you got to hit refresh here.
Let's start that over. Georgia 1, Alabama 2, Texas 3, right. Oklahoma 4, LSU in there in the top 5. That's 5.
Yeah.
You know, if you get into Florida's dormant, Tennessee 7. So now where's A&M? 8, 7, 8, 6, 7, 8.
I tell you what this also did, Matt. This is there's going to be a domino effect here. A couple of other guys just got fired because if you're at some of these other schools and you're trying to compete in the SEC and you see a guy that who just won by 40 points against your school, and he got fired on a Sunday. What does that say about your guy? If you're at Arkansas, if you're at Florida, a lot of places where I think there's a lot of soul searching now, and I think we were talking about A&M, what kind of school it is. I still believe it can be elite, but it has to have the right coach. And Jimbo Fisher was just going to the most expensive store on Fifth Avenue and buying the most expensive clothes and thinking that's going to get you in the after party at a Taylor Swift concert. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
I mean, no, I don't care what kind of car you drove up in, you're still not getting in.
You're dead right. And when Texas A&M now, look, this need to me, and I've said this for a long time, coaches and agents have held college football hostage now for a decade. What happens every single year? A couple of big jobs come open. Coach X somehow goes 8-4 and 9-3 at his particular job. They get an extension, and then you hold the school hostage because you got a higher buyout. You got an extension you didn't deserve because you had a decent season. This, to me, with the money that Texas A&M has to dole out to Jimbo Fisher, needs to change the landscape of coaching forever. Because if there's an AD out there dumb enough to get into this kind of contract again, based on the return in your investment, then I can't help you. If there's not one person that is sitting here today saying, Jimbo, worth the money. Thanks for everything you did. We'll gladly pay your way out. You made us better than we were before.
But Matt, we could do a whole nother, we could do 4 hours on this subject, but we'll move on. But a quick note. Right now, the agents are very few. They're only a handful. They don't only control the head coach. They control the assistant coaches. They control basketball, baseball. So ADs really do get held hostage by these guys. And ADs just don't. I mean, ADs are avid Twitter followers. They do not like when they get criticized. So they try to win the day. I know that sounds like I'm, giving a motivational speech, carpe diem, but that's what happens, and that's why they end up. And with Jimbo, in defense of Ross Bjork, the AD at A&M, he didn't hire Jimbo Fisher. Scott Woodward did, and then he left. Well, what happened was the reason Jimbo got this unbelievable extension and buyout is that Scott Woodward was going to hire Jimbo at LSU. And to replace Ogeron, and A&M did not want to lose him. At the time, Jimbo was, he had that COVID season which I don't know whether that's even legitimate anymore, but he almost got to the playoffs. He finished 5th in the country. He had a lot of momentum, and then he had the recruiting class that set Nick Saban on its ears. And I'm one last moment. Has Saban ever beaten somebody down more than Jimbo Fisher after all that? And yet, while Saban's clinching the West and really silencing critics across the country, Jimbo Fisher is getting fired.